What's up, developers? This is chapter 7 of my Cloudflare and Hono course, and in this chapter we'll be adding a Hono server to our application and then configuring our front and back end to work together for local development. So first thing we're going to want to do is install Hono into our app. So here I'm on the npmjs.com where we can look at different packages and then get the install command. So here I'm looking at Hono, and it gives us a very basic example for setting up the most basic Hono server. So I'm going to copy that, and then to install it, I'm not going to use npm, I'm going to use bun. So it'll be bun add Hono. So let's jump over to VS Code. And then from here, I can open up the terminal and I'm going to install Hono. So bun add Hono. All right, so now I've got it. And then what I want to do is take a quick look at the folder structure over here. So here I have a source folder with a client inside of it, and I want to add in a server directory. So if I click on source and add a directory and say server, now we can start to see the shape of our folder structure. So all of our application code is stored in the source directory, and then anything front end will be stored in client, and everything back end will be in our server folder. So that way we keep things nice and clean and organized, and keeping our front and back ends separate. Okay, so now that I have Hono installed and I have my server directory, I need to add an index.ts file. And then I had copied over that basic Hono code, and I can paste that here. So now that I have a basic Hono server here, I want to run the server locally and make sure that it actually works. So to do that, we're going to use a tool called Wrangler. So if I jump over here to Google, we can see here on npm I have Wrangler pulled up. Now, Wrangler is Cloudflare's official CLI tool for managing Cloudflare workers. So if I jump over here to my next tab, we can see that Wrangler has some very in-depth documentation here on the Cloudflare website. And what I'll first point you to is just this line here. So this is what we're going to do right away. It says create, develop, and deploy your Cloudflare workers with Wrangler commands. So we'll be able to develop, and meaning run a local server on our machine, run our Hono server as if it was a Cloudflare worker. And that way we can test it out locally before deploying to Cloudflare. So it's a very powerful CLI. There is a lot that goes into it. So the npm docs here don't have too much, but then when you jump over to the Cloudflare documentation, this is a whole rabbit hole. You can see as I scroll down that there is a ton of information here. So much you can do with the CLI tool. But for starters, we're just going to run our Hono server as if it were a Cloudflare worker locally. So let's do this command, npmi Wrangler, and I'm using bun. So I will do bun add Wrangler. Okay, so now that I have Wrangler installed, I can jump over to my package JSON and I can add a new script. And this will be for running our server locally. So we'll call this worker because we're running a Cloudflare worker. And then we can just say Wrangler dev. Okay, so the next step before we can run our server locally is we need a configuration file for Wrangler. So if we jump back over to the documentation here, Wrangler, we can see configuration. So if I click on this, Here at the top, it says Wrangler supports both JSON or JSON-C, and JSON-C is JSON with comments. So JSON-C is a little bit better because we can add some nice comments in there. Also, TOML, I'm going to go with JSON-C because that's what I prefer. And so as we scroll down, here is a sample Wrangler configuration, wrangler.jsonc. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and copy this, jump back over to VS Code, add a new file, and call it Wrangler JSON-C, and then paste that in. And now I'm going to delete most of this because we'll add the complexity as we need it. But for now, we're not going to do separate environments right now. We're not doing a key value store. And don't need the routes right now. Compatibility date. Let's see if we can go without that. Workers dev. And without the schema as well. So really cleaned up most of this. And then the name, I'm going to call it the name of my application. So and then the main entry point for our worker. So for us, we have server or source, and then server, and then index TS. So we'll update this to source, server, index TS. Okay, now that we have our config file and we're telling it where our main server file is, our entry point, we can run our worker locally with this command. So let's give it a try. Bun run worker. All right, and then we can see, so it ran Wrangler dev, and it's giving me a warning that no compatibility date was specified. So using the installed workers runtime latest support date of 2025 11/18. So that's actually what I want to do. Add one file compatibility date equals this. And then we can see that other than that, ready on our local host 8787. So here, let me kill that and add this compatibility date back in. All right. And then if I start it back up, hopefully we don't see that warning. Okay, nice. So no warnings now. Everything's looking good. Wrangler, and we are available on our local host. So let's go ahead and click on this and check it out. So here I am in the browser. I'm port 8787, and we have Hono. So that means it worked. Our local server is now up and running. And we know that that's what we are expecting because in index.ts, the get at the root is just going to respond with Hono. So everything is looking good. Now what I want to do is run both the front end and the back end at the same time so I can develop my full stack application locally. So if we take a look at the package.json, we have a dev script that runs our client, and now we have a worker script that runs our server, our worker. So here's what I want to do is rename this dev script to client to make it a little bit more clear that that's what's happening. And then I can create a new script to run them at the same time. So there is a handy little tool called concurrently, and let me pull that up really quick. Run commands concurrently. So it does what it says it does. And basically it will allow us to run two commands at the same time so we can run our front end and our back end. So here I'm going to install concurrently. I'll copy that, jump back over to VS Code, and I can close my server for now and paste that, and then switch out npm for bun. All right, it's installed, and now I can add my concurrent script. So we will call this one dev because it's truly running both the front and the back end at the same time. And then we can say concurrently, and we need to escape and say bun run client and escape and put our quotes again. And so bun run client will run this script, this client script. And then we also want to tell it to run our worker at the same time. So to do that, we can then just add another bun run worker. And there we go. So concurrently, we'll run both of these scripts at the same time. So if we go ahead and give that a try, let's see if it works. All right, so we can see that it worked. We can see concurrently it's running both of those, and then we can see bun run bun astro dev. So it's running our client and it's running the Wrangler dev. So then we can see the logs for both of them as well. We can see the Wrangler dev here on 8787, and we can see Astro on 4321. So let's go ahead and click on both of these and verify that. Okay, so there's our front end looking good. Jump back over here and click on that, and there's our back end, our little Hono. All right, sweet. So everything is looking pretty good. So we can run our front and our back end at the same time now, but our front and back end are not actually connected together. They're not interacting with each other. So let's kill that server and take a look at our Hono server. So right now it just returns the text of Hono. So here's what I want to do. I want to create, instead update this to API health. So this is a common practice in the industry where you have just a very simple health endpoint, and this is going to be a JSON REST API. So we'll just respond with healthy and throw in an emoji, fire for Hono. Okay, so now what I want to do is call this endpoint from the client. So that way I can confirm that the client and the server can actually talk to each other. So if I come over to client, let's create a new component, and it'll just be, I'm going to call it the server status component. And this component we will delete later. So for now, it's just for development purposes to confirm that we can connect our front and back end. And once we're done with it, we know everything is working, then we can get rid of it. But this is a great way to confirm that everything is configured correctly. So basically what I want to do is do just a basic fetch request and call that health endpoint. So let's make this a React component. All right. And then what we're going to need to do is add in a use effect in order to fetch from the server. So let's import use effect from React. There we go. And say use effect. And then here I'm going to add an empty array for dependencies, and what that means is this will run once when the component renders, and that's it. We only need it to run one time. And then I'll use the basic fetch here, and we'll just say /API/health. and then I can do a .then, chain that on there, and say for the response, we'll convert it to JSON. And then also what I want to do is be able to display that response. So that means we need a piece of state. So we can bring in useState from React, and we'll call this the message, or actually status would be better. Status, and then set status equals useState. And we'll just leave it as an empty string. And then after we get that JSON response, we can then chain on another .then where we take the data and we set the message. Sorry, set the status, there we go, to the data that is returned. And then that should just give us this healthy text. Okay, and then we need to actually return some JSX. So here, let's do a div, and then let's have just one layer that says server status, and then one that has the response from the server. So we'll call this h1 for header, and we'll just say, okay, this is server status. And then we'll have a paragraph, and we'll put in curly braces so we can access that status value right there. Okay, so that should pretty much do it for us. We're fetching from the health endpoint, we're taking that response, saving it here, and then displaying it. And now we need to use this new component inside of our index. So this is our main index page. We have our hero component up here, we got our sign up, and we've got our 3 cards. So then let's go ahead and add our server status component. Server status, there we go. And it was imported. All right. And then let's do bun run dev. And pull up our front end. And okay, so there we can see our server status. So that's good. And it's actually crammed down here in the bottom corner, which is where I put it, but also a little annoying. So let me move that just for my sanity's sake, since this is a temporary component anyway. Let's move it up here. I like that a little bit better. And okay, there we go. It was reloaded. And if we inspect this, we can see we're not getting anything under the paragraph tag. And partly that is because we need to tell tell Astro that this is a client component that needs to be rendered hydrated with JavaScript. So we can do that by saying client load. There we go. And now let's take a peek again. Refresh. And we're still not seeing our response from our server. So let's see if we can investigate this a little bit more and come over to our network tab and see if we're making a fetch request. Okay, so here we go. Health endpoint, we're getting a 404, not found. So it's not finding our endpoint. And here we can see HTTP localhost 4321 API health. Now that is the wrong port. So if we jump back over to VS Code, we can see here, okay, so we're even getting that 404 in the logs, which is super nice. And before, error, invalid hydration directive. Oh, that was because I was typing. But that issue is now fixed. And our front end is running on 4321, but our workflow worker is running on 8787. So we need to tell our front end that for local development, we actually want to um, fetch from 8787 instead of 4321. Okay, so to get our front end to communicate with the correct backend port, we can set up our configuration in our astro config MJS file. So let's go ahead and terminate this server. It's always good when you're changing configs to kill your server, even though you have hot reloading, because sometimes the configs don't always update with the hot reloading. But anyway, inside of here, we want to tell Astro, our front end, to communicate with our back end on that other port. So to do that, we can add in a server here into the Vite config. So server, you can see that autocomplete that popped up for me. And then there's a thing called a proxy. And this basically tells Astro to point to a different port. So we can say anything that is going to /API, because we'll prefix everything in our Hono server with /API, to instead target our HTTP localhost 8787. And this configuration is only for local development. This does not impact production at all. When we deploy this to production on Cloudflare, it's all going to be coming from the same port, and Cloudflare handles that for us. So we won't need to worry about this. But for local development, we do need to worry about it. So cool. We now have our proxy. And if I go ahead and start up my server again, bun run dev, and jump over to the browser, check it out. We have our server status of healthy. So our front end and our back end are communicating successfully. Okay, so I want to center this text, bring it over here just to make it look a little bit prettier, because we are going to deploy this code, and I want to make sure that the server and the client are communicating successfully when we do an initial deployment. So if I jump back over here to server status, we can just add a little bit of CSS to clean this up. Say like text large and text center. And then here we'll say we can keep the text the same size, but text center. And then let's change the color. Text green is for success. So let's say text green 500. Okay, and then let's take a look. There we go. Server status of healthy. Awesome. So that's going to wrap it up for this chapter. We now have our front end and our back end running together locally. And in the next chapter, we are going to deploy everything to Cloudflare and test it out there.